never too early to talk about the 2023 NFL Draft, right? And one guy who has been on Ryan Wilson's mock draft list week after week is Bryce Young. The Bama QB throwing for 3 TDs and 209 yards in the Crimson Tide's win over Ole Miss on Saturday. However, Bryce Young's size has come into question in regards to his potential success as an NFL QB. Now, despite that, Bryce Young, he's still number 1 on Ryan Wilson's most recent mock draft, going to Houston. We got Bama getting the number 1 and the number 2 pick, with Will Anderson Jr. going to Pittsburgh. We have Fashanu going number 3 to the Bears. Ryan has CJ Stroud going to Indy, number 4. And then rounding out the top 5 for Ryan is Jalen Carter to the Lions. And let's welcome in the man himself, Ryan Wilson, to break everything down. Ryan, starting off, you have Bryce Young going number 1 to the Texans. Why do you still think that Young is a franchise QB going number 1 overall despite his size? The size doesn't concern you at all.
It concerns me quite a bit, as it turns out, Jacqueline. And worth noting, we saw that graphic. It's reverse Super Bowl odds for people who didn't read the fine print. So don't get angry if I have your team too high or too low. That's just how we think here at Sportsline. The Super Bowl odds will play out in reverse order. So talking about Bryce Young in particular, had him going to Houston. They obviously had Davis Mills on the roster. He's good, but not great, and I think it's fair to think that you could upgrade from that. But as you mentioned, Jacqueline, I've talked to people at Alabama that says Bryce Young is 5'10", 185. And if you go back and look through the last 22 years of combine participants who play quarterback at or around that size, 2 names, 1 and 2, come up. Seneca Wallace, a former 4th-round pick, and Joe Hamilton, a former 7th-round pick. So this is precedent setting. But when you watch him play, he can run. You see that right here. He is so good in the pocket. He is so good at making defenders miss. And this is Tennessee, who have a lot of dudes on defense, and not only making people miss inside the pocket, then finding the open wide receiver. And he's not throwing to all those 5-star first-round picks that Mac Jones and Tua Tagovailoa were throwing to. He's throwing to guys who sometimes struggle to get open, and he's doing much of the heavy lifting himself. So all those things taken together, and I've talked to people in the league that are grudgingly willing to admit that Bryce Young has had a fantastic season, and they're going to have to try to get over the height-weight issues. But if he were 6'1", 200 pounds, he would be the first overall pick, no questions asked. The issues, of course, are the size and the durability, but it's hard to take away what he's been able to do this year, dragging Alabama's offense up and down the field into the end zone, keeping them in all these close games.
All right, and as of right now, you have Will Anderson Jr. potentially going number 2 to the Steelers. I mean, the Steelers, it's been rough for them. They're the worst team in their division, Ryan. How do you see Anderson being a good fit for that D-line, especially when they have some stars there like T.J. Watt?
Jacqueline, as a Steelers homer, and I know you have ties to the Bengals, yes. That was a low blow, calling the Steelers the worst team in that division. I mean, they are the worst team in that division, unfortunately. Without a doubt. And that's why they're picking this high, at least according to the Super Bowl odds. In fact, the real draft order is not much different. We'll see how it plays out at the end of the season. But Will Anderson, if he's there at 2, you have choices in which to pick to make that team better. You could go Ola Fashanu, the left tackle, who you mentioned in the early part of the talk here, who's going to go pretty high. They need help there. You could go Jalen Carter, the Georgia defensive tackle, who helps right away. Or you go Will Anderson. And here's an idea. You put Will Anderson opposite T.J. Watt and Alex Highsmith. Now you're cooking with gas. And he has not been as flashy this year as we've seen in years past. This is what happens when you get double team on just about each and every snap. But he is incredibly dynamic. He's an incredibly mature, smart, hardworking young man. And all those things taken together, when you look at the athleticism, the twitch, the juice, whatever word you want to use, in scout lingo, it shows up play after play after play. He's going to be one of the first guys drafted, arguably the best non-quarterback in this draft class. And I think the Steelers would jump at the opportunity, if they're picking number 2, which of course would make them the worst team in the division, to take someone like Will Anderson and supplement a defense that struggled at times this year.
All right, and CJ Stroud, you have him going number 4 to the Colts right now. I mean, since Andrew Luck's retired, it's kind of been a QB carousel there in Indy, Ryan. If it's not Bryce Young and it is CJ Stroud there with the Colts, do you think he could be a successful franchise QB in Indy?
Well, that's certainly what Indianapolis is going to hope. So the thing with C.J. Stroud is he's not the athlete that Justin Fields is. And Justin Fields, and this is a cautionary tale, didn't really start to catch fire until the last few weeks because they decided to finally tailor the offense around him in Chicago to what he does best. And I think that's a story that we need to keep telling ourselves as GMs and offensive coordinators and head coaches. When you get a young quarterback, don't try to fit the round peg into the square peg into the round hole. Try to make it fit and make it work together, and that's what's going to have to happen with C.J. Stroud. Now, the issue with C.J. Stroud, there are few of them, honestly. He does a lot of things really well. He's not the athlete on the edge. He won't run like Justin Fields will. He's accurate down the field. He doesn't throw with a lot of anticipation, but when you're throwing to guys that are wide open, you don't necessarily need to do that. So there's going to be a learning curve at the next level. But you mentioned it. In a post-Andrew Luck world, we've had Jacoby Brissett, Brian Hoyer, Phillip Rivers, Carson Wentz this year, and then last year, who was it? It was, Matt Ryan this year, excuse me. Yeah, so it's been a lot of swing and whiffs in terms of the veteran quarterbacks trying to fill that void by Andrew Luck. I would imagine Jim Irsay, turns out he seems to be a little bit impulsive. Will also impulsively try to get a next franchise quarterback. And I think C.J. Stroud, if he's there, will be in the conversation. Will Levis will be in the conversation. I don't know if Anthony Richardson might be there. We'll talk about him in a second. But there'll be a few players to pick from if you're the Colts, especially if you're targeting a quarterback.
Yeah, Ryan, we'll dive into Anthony Richardson in just a moment. Before that, Jordan Addison going number 14 in your latest mock draft to the Packers. I mean, I think Packers fans would appreciate any help at the wide receiver position. If there's anyone that needs that help, it is Green Bay. Ryan.
Absolutely. So Christian Watson, was a second-round pick last year, or in the spring, and he finally had that breakout game. 4 catches, 3 touchdowns, over 100 yards. He still is under 200 yards for the season in terms of receiving, but he's getting there. But the issue is, Jacqueline, is that this team, for reasons that remain a mystery, refused to draft wide receivers. Here's a fact that I regurgitated each and every week up until the draft last year. You can scribble it down and use it as your own. The last time the Packers drafted a wide receiver was 2002 when they took Javon Walker. That's 20 years ago. And in fact, I just checked before we did this segment, 11 of the last 12 first-round picks have all been on defense. The only offensive player they took, Jordan Love, when they traded up for a quarterback in the deepest wide receiver class in human history. Jordan Addison solves all those problems. He's not as tall as Christian Watson. He's actually about 5'11", 185-ish. He plays bigger than that. He's incredibly quick. You just saw him run through the arm tackle there. He does that consistently. He runs by guys all day long, as you see here against Stanford. And those things show up. He's a guy that can come in right away and give you production, which is what we don't see all the time from young wide receivers. So, the funny thing would be if that they finally get a wide receiver in the first round and Aaron Rodgers retires, but whoever the next quarterback is, whether it's Jordan Love or someone else, at least they will have the benefit of a first-round wide receiver to throw the ball to who can probably start from day one.
And Ryan, there was a ton of wide receivers last year in the draft. So how do you compare the wide receivers in this class to the wide receivers in last year's draft class?
Oh, so the thing, Jacqueline, that's sort of evolved over the last 4 or 5 or 6 years is that these wide receivers are so good because now these offenses they basically start at high school and trickle up. So they start at high school, trickle up to college, and then they finally make their way to the NFL. And these wide open offenses have been around for a while. So this class is as deep as last year's class. Maybe not as deep as 2020 at the top. We'll probably see 3, maybe 4 wide receivers going round 1 as we sit here right now. Quentin Johnson, of course, is going to be in the mix. Jackson Smith and Jigba, you see him there. I have him going 16th to the Giants. Jalen Hyatt is a track star who has made himself a lot of money, as you like to say, based on how he's played this year at Tennessee, just outrunning everyone to the end zone. But from top to bottom, it's just as deep as last year's class. There's going to be a lot of guys to get drafted on day 2 and maybe even day 3 that contribute right away because they're so much more prepared to contribute sooner rather than later based on their experiences, not only in college, but now in high school.
All right, Ryan, let's get to Anthony Richardson. In the latest mock draft, you have him going number 24 to the Bucs. Interesting also because former Florida QB Kyle Trask, he's already there in Tampa Bay, and there's, I feel like, 2 arguments to be had here. So physically, Richardson's been compared to Josh Allen at the quarterback position, but also I've seen him appear on your list week after week, and I've been reading the Twitter comments trying to see what the vibe is around Richardson, and there's also an argument to be had that maybe he needs another year at Florida. He's not super consistent. So what would you say to people who are kind of questioning the experience that he has?
Congratulations, Jacqueline. You are now the senior draft analyst because you basically encapsulated everything that the questions that people have about Anthony Richardson. And I think he needs to go back to school. I think you can't find anyone, perhaps outside of Richardson's camp, that feels differently. It's unclear what he plans to do. There are reports that he may come out. But you're right. You watch him play, and we talked about the Utah game, how incredibly awesome he was in that game. You're like, okay, here we go, buckle up. And then, the car, Thelma and Louise, did right off the cliff. And you're like, okay, that didn't go quite as we planned. And you mentioned Kyle Trask, which is an interesting comparison because he was at Florida his last year. He was balling out. Now, he's nowhere near the athlete. He doesn't have the arm strength, but he made a ton of good decisions. He won a lot of football games for Florida, ended up going early in the third round. And maybe the situation is if you draft him in Tampa Bay, Anthony Richardson, your plan is, well, we can re-sign Blaine Gabbert, give him a chance to win the job. We can give Kyle Trask a chance to win the job. He still has 2 more years left in his rookie deal, and Anthony Richardson needs to sit. Under no circumstances should Anthony Richardson be on a football field in the NFL next year as a starting quarterback. That has to be understood. And if you take it a step further, obviously he needs to return to school. Now, the tools will blow you away, and it's going to be interesting to see if there's a team willing to take a chance on him. My guess is yes, there will be, because there always are. If you have a 5% chance to get 80% of Josh Allen. That's a lot of math there. I feel like you're going to take that chance if you're a GM in desperate need of a quarterback. But we'll see. I agree with you. I think you're exactly right in your scouting report of Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, and I have to admit I am a Florida fan, so I've been watching a lot of Anthony Richardson this season, and watching the Utah game versus the USF game. It's like watching two different guys. But, I mean, you get it, Ryan, obviously. All right, and that is Ryan Wilson.
No, you're exactly right.
Thanks so much, Ryan, for breaking down his latest mock draft. You can also check that out on CBSSports.com. And you can also hear Ryan on the Pick Six podcast. In the very latest episode, the guys are breaking down their best bets for Week 11 in the NFL. You can download and listen wherever you get your podcast, or also scan that QR code.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.